Hey guys, nothing important here, and today I'm here to do a video on Oryx the Taken King versus Rhulk, the first disciple of the Witness. Now, the reason why I'm doing this video is because I noticed that there's actually some confusion regarding both Rhulk and Oryx, so I figured doing a versus battle to compare the two will actually just settle the topic entirely with both characters in one go. Anyway, so I'm going to scale the characters and do this in a set of rounds and then explain the scaling inverse rather than using power scaling terms, because I'm sure we're all tired of hearing power scaling terms at this point. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the video. Starting with the Oryx, I'll make this quick. So with the Hive, the scaling goes as follows. The Hive are the strongest in their true forms within the Ascended Plane and their Throne Worlds, but in the physical world they're a lot weaker, hence the downplay you see with the Hive. So the Hive in the real world you could argue to be finite levels of power, the scaling jankery behind all that, yada yada. You could get behind all that in a separate video. But the Hive in the physical world don't matter here since we're scaling full power Oryx. So, scaling the full power Hive, it goes as follows. You have Trash Hive like the Thralls, you have the Acolytes, you have the Knights, you have the Wizards, you have Ogres, you have a lot of Trash Hive. All these Trash Hive, which you see commonly in the physical world, have these things called Ascendant States. And these Hive gain enough power to get these things called Throne Worlds. Throne Worlds are these worlds that allow them to be the rulers of this space, and that they're essentially the gods of this space. These worlds are all in a stack that goes on infinitely and up, and that these worlds eventually arrive to these states where they eventually go to something called inaccessible. Inaccessible then goes higher and higher. Eventually you reach the Hive Gods. The Hive Gods all vary in power, and you have to consider something like the Court of Oryx also, the High War. And there's a lot to go into with the High War, but basically Oryx scales above them all. He scales above the War Priest, he scales above the Daughters, he scales above Crota, he scales above Golgoroth, he scales above everybody. At this point he also scales above Savathûn, and he also scales above Xivu Arath. Savathûn, who we learn later actually surpassed Oryx after the collapse via tricking the Witness, but that's for a separate video. Anyway, Oryx is the strongest Hive within the Ascendant Plane, and that there's several versions of Oryx, and that depending on how you scale Oryx and which version you scale, you'll have different conclusions with the scaling. But if you look at Oryx at his full power in the Books of Sorrow, you can see that he's really strong, and that it took until Witch Queen for characters to reach his level of power. Anyway, let's move on to Rhulk. So with Rhulk, things go from 0 to 100 real fast. So, he's part of these race of beings called the Lubrinians, and the Lubrinians are extremely strong. I'll explain this later. So, with Rhulk, he is this psychopath who's pretty much unnerved everyone around him because of his odd tendencies of being cold and arguably psychotic or insane. So, one day, these soldiers come to his house and they threaten to kill everyone. Then he picks up this glaive and he kills all the soldiers. And then he scares everyone into basically shutting him away. So he runs away because his father is also taken away, because he believed that if he got his father back, everyone would accept him. So instead, no, he goes, and it turns out his father's a traitor. So eventually he works for his father for a while, goes on missions. Eventually he's not really content with it. So then eventually things happen. He goes against his father. His father basically about kills him, and he sends him down this canyon. And when he goes down this canyon, he then meets this creature that we then later learn is the Witness. So the Witness offered Rhulk this position to be this disciple. So then he accepted the position. So then the Witness fixed the glaive and healed Rhulk, and then he became paracausal. So let me stop there for a second. Rhulk, without being paracausal, as in he's purely physical, has only done physical feats at this point, already outscales the Hive and possibly everything around the Hive in power, including the Vex. So, Rhulk goes from being this physical garbage to being this paracausal entity that can do whatever he wants. And he does a lot of crazy stuff that I'll explain later. So, already from the get-go, he outscales the Hive. So then eventually he goes and kills his father. And then eventually he gets this thing called the Upended. And then he upends his son, where he reverses, inverts it, where it basically cracks and explodes. And he does this thing where he's basically Lobo from DC, where he has to be the last dude of his race in order to be a disciple. And so he does it. So Rhulk is pretty strong because he's waging this cosmic pissing match of Savathûn. He is casually outscaling a bunch of Hive, considering all the Hive in their entirety to be infinitesimal to him. He has a lot of scaling that I'll get into in a later video. But anyway, Rhulk is a really strong character and he should not be downplayed anyway. Like, it's basically another case of Callus, but we'll talk about Callus in his video after Lightfall drops. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to their abilities. Oryx has a lot of power, so I'll try to list the majority of them that matter quickly. So, first, we know he's able to erase you from existence, as in the mind, body, and soul, due to the fact that the Hive downscale from Oryx, the Hive which have a lot of feats against the Vex which have a lot of feats against the Hive and other races, all downscale from below Oryx. So, this means he's able to manipulate the mind, body, soul, he's able to manipulate concepts, and he's even able to manipulate narratives. Not only is he able to manipulate these things, he's also able to command you to die, as in he can use death manipulation. He has law manipulation. He has causality manipulation. He can teleport. He can use Hive magic, so he can basically lift you in the air and strangle you like he's using the Force. He's able to create these things called shades, which are basically avatars of himself. The scaling for the shades will naturally vary, and also it depends on how you scale the shades to Oryx, along with his physical body to his true form. Although I would argue that he has physical forms and they suck, which is the reason why we're even able to kill them in the first place. So try not to give Oryx too much crap. I mean, I give him crap, but it doesn't mean you should give him too much crap just because of taking King. Like, there's a lot of context behind it. Anyway, so he has a lot of abilities that are all insane. Not only is he able to do this stuff, he's also able to use Ahamkara magic. Ahamkara magic is completely and utterly insane. It's this monkey's paw type ability that basically can grant a wish, but in the form that the caster can choose. And that this ability actually stems from who wants their wish to be granted, rather than the caster. So Oryx can do a lot of arguably no limits fallacy type stuff with wishing. So that's one thing you should keep in mind with Oryx. Then there's his ability to take. Basically, he can take away things that seem like they're garbage, and he can add things that seem like they're good. And he can basically say it like this. You are now in your strongest form because I empower you with what is strongest. You have literally no weaknesses because I remove the concept of weakness away from you. He says this in all the Taken lore if you check down below in the description to the tier list, which in that description has a lot of scans pertaining to the Taken. So just go and check that video below. So his Taken ability is also really, really strong. Also, he has one more ability. Besides his giant form, which I'll get into that. He has a sword called Willbreaker, but with Willbreaker, it transcends this concept called liminality. So liminality, basically he has to pull out the sword and slash you with it. But because his sword Willbreaker is beyond liminality, he can basically keep his sword sheathed and he's able to cut you with it if you're able to go to a blind spot of his. So basically it means he's able to use his sword without even having to use his sword in the first place. Also, good luck trying to find his past or his future, because he only exists in the present. He's types 4 and 5 acausal, and he has multiple forms of immortality, making him very, very difficult to kill, besides with the abilities he has, that also just add to his sheer and utter and complete upscaling. So, let's go ahead and get into Rhulk's abilities. So Rhulk also has a lot of abilities, so he can also erase your mind, body, soul, spirit. He can also erase your concept, and he can also erase your narrative. He also has reality warping, subjective reality. He also has law manipulation. He also has causality manipulation. He also has death manipulation, but he also has a few unique abilities of his own. So first off, he has a rather ruthless tenacity that allows him to continue fighting even if he's being hurt. If you're hurting Rhulk and doing a lot of damage, he can basically ignore the damage you're doing to him. It's very similar to Oryx, but he has a lot of determination. So, good luck putting him down, straight up. Not only is he really hard to put down, he also has this very strong form of invulnerability. Hive have invulnerability in their throne worlds, but Rhulk has an invulnerability that can work outside of his pyramid ship. While Rhulk is also invulnerable to attacks, and while he also has less hacks, he also has these blasts that he can do a lot with. He can fire 4 at the same time, but he can also fire them from parts of the barrier he can put up. Which, by the way, that barrier can kick out anything he wants from it, which kicked out the entire fire team. They had to literally tank attacks from Rhulk and just avoid being killed in order to go into it and try to reverse the barrier by nerfing it several times over before they could actually go and challenge Rhulk to a fight. And even when they put down the barrier, they had to shoot Rhulk a bunch. They had to shoot exposed parts of him and then just utterly and completely destroy his invulnerability in multiple levels. So not only is he extremely invulnerable, he has multiple levels of invulnerability. So he can also fly around, he has ranged attacks, and he has somewhat similar powers to Oryx in terms of darkness abilities. So he's a very powerful character. Although the thing with Rhulk is that he's more of a physical character. He's an extremely skilled combatant, like Oryx, but while Oryx has more use with his sword, he has more use with his glaive because he can summon it to him at all times, basically, and hit you with it, or he can summon it back to his hand, he could throw it at you. He could basically just run at you and then summon this, wave of energy to basically go and hit you. He has multiple dash attacks. He's more of a physical character rather than Oryx, who's a hacksy character. So, anyway, let's go ahead and get into who wins the fight. So the answer for Rhulk versus Oryx is a bit more nuanced. On one hand, I can go ahead and just say that Rhulk speed blitzes and one-shots Oryx because you have the Fire Team, the Caretaker, and multiple versions of Savathun, each having very strong and very OP feats compared to even Oryx, before Savathun even got the light. So there's a massive scaling differential between Rhulk and Oryx. On the other hand though, Savathun said that D2 Oryx existed because she said, "The Taken King would rise again." In the trailer for Destiny 2 King's Fall, it said the Taken King would rise again. So, we know Destiny 2 Oryx exists. And we also know that Paraverse Oryx exists because Paraverse Crota exists. So, on the other hand, if we had a version of Oryx strong enough and we put him up against Rhulk, we can say that he has better hacks and he can outscale Rhulk over time, or is just straight up stronger than Rhulk if they were to fight. It's just the problem is, it's going to depend on the version of Oryx you use, because we're scaling Oryx a bit unconventionally here, using Destiny 2 Oryx and also Paraverse Oryx, although it is still sound in everything else. It's just, you want to be careful in how you argue Oryx, because there's multiple iterations of him. So, while in the conventional case, Rhulk would win, on the other hand, in equal stats, or relative stats, it's a very possible case to make for Oryx winning. Because remember, you know how I talked about Giant? Well, he can take his power from Willbreaker, put it into himself, and then go into this Giant state. This Giant state is a massive stat increase that managed to offset his nerf and put him back at full power. So, what happened was that we had to go into King's Fall raid, and then we had to kill the rest of the High War after we killed his avatars. And then we fought this giant body of Oryx. And we had to fight and kill him via detonating these blights, which hurt him. It wasn't us killing him like in the D2 version. In the D2 version, he's actually really OP. although we're directly DPSing him, whereas compared to the Destiny 1 King's Fall raid, we're just detonating blights and we're hitting him just to stun him. So the scaling would depend on how you differ King's Fall from Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. So there's not much else to say here other than these two are really OP, and it's going to depend on how you scale Rhulk, and it's going to depend on how you scale Oryx. But if you go with Rhulk from this universe and Oryx in this universe, Rhulk is winning. It just remember, do not downplay Oryx, because he has more hacks than Rhulk, which is a very terrifying thing to think about. The first disciple of the Witness is being able to be out-hacked by someone who is basically below him in terms of form. And yet, even though Rhulk managed to gain his powers and become a disciple before Oryx even existed, essentially, it doesn't change the fact that Oryx has more powers. So, if Oryx were to be close enough to him in power, he's going to win over time. So, if you guys like this video, please let me know and I'll do more stuff like this. Anyway, my name is Nothing Important here, and I'll see y'all later. Bye.